I'm going to pause it here for a moment. Thank you, everybody who's online so far, for joining us this evening. This is a presentation of Caleb's Economic Mobility Task Force with candidate for Mayor of Chattanooga, Tim Kelly. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to get started again in just a minute with a short video that introduces you to Caleb, anybody who is unfamiliar with our organization. And then we'll jump right into a short program and hear from Mr. Kelly. So thank you all for being here.
Is a coalition of churches, nonprofits, labor unions, civic organizations that come together around common issues in order to build power for change. I mean, that's really the short of it.
Especially in action. I think, faith without works is dead. And then equality of seeing that everyone has a seat at the table. And then also love. Without love, we won't be able to do anything, or nothing will be fruitful of what we do. And then benevolence is the kindness, just showing kindness in a mean world, I think speaks volume, as well as there are so many people that have it in their heart that they want to do something, but don't know how to do it, or where to do it, or how to get involved. And so right now, what Caleb is at the right moment is because we're just a reflection of allowing people to see that it can no longer happen on our watch. I think that the time of change is always now. There's never a period where we can wait for justice to come. We're going to have to make it come. I think that the time is right now because we have so many committed and dedicated people that have sacrificed their time to say, I want to be involved. Not just speak of what they want to do, but actually put their heart and their soul and their monies behind it. And I think that's what has helped us. When you have dedicated people, when you have committed people, when you have people that have found their passion, that's what has made the difference. We have been able to connect people that have found their passion. They have found their voice and they are using it.
And so thank you again for joining us tonight. My name is Robert Winslow. This is the Caleb Economic Mobility Task Force. A little over a year ago, our process started with wanting to understand how to involve the community and how we as an organization could play a positive role for better economic prospects and better economic inclusion in our city. And the Develop With Us campaign is our special focus now. And we are very excited to be able to engage in candidates for city office with our questions and with this campaign that we will be continuing into the next administration to try to ensure that the public interest is served through the economic development strategy and use of public resources. So we know that our city has enjoyed a period of growth in the last decade, but that growth has not been seen by everyone in our community. Almost 13% of families in Chattanooga still live below the poverty line. That is a third higher than the national average. And income growth is slower here than the national average, despite the increase in the economy overall. We're going to skip some of these slides. It's nothing that I'm sure you're not aware of. that we've, since you're joining us for this conversation tonight. What we're interested in is clarity about how decisions for economic development are made. I'm going to pass it to Lanisha to talk about what values guide Caleb's work.
Hello, my name is Lanisha Lake, and I am the co-chair for the Economic Mobility Task Force. Our values, or what good development looks like, are living wages. No one should have to work more than one full-time job to provide for themselves or their family. Community stability. Investment should increase opportunity and quality of life for low and moderate income families. Every Chattanoogan deserves secure housing in a safe and thriving community. Our third value is equitable transit. When people have access to safe, affordable public transit, they're able to get to jobs, training, and education that provide pathways to economic sustainability. What we want transparency and community voice in decisions involving public money that would impact our neighborhoods. Accountability, community-centered metrics that ensure that companies who get public resources are actually benefiting our people. Good development happens with us, not to us.
The real focus of our Develop With Us campaign is on one factor that guides economic development here locally, and that is the tax breaks and incentives deals that are given as part of our recruitment of employers. Our process started with some questions. We wanted to know the magnitude of that issue, how the tax break process works, who decides, and who makes sure that those decisions are made in the public interest and that the public has some say in the process. Last year, the amount of public revenue that was foregone, that we did not collect, was $25 million from industries, corporations exempted from certain shares of tax. And the agreements like that can typically last a decade or more. That tax revenue, if it were collected, would be part of funding our local infrastructure, public safety, parks, libraries, neighborhood services. And when those essential public services come under strain, or when there is a lack of tax revenue, this is part of the reason why. 90% of those tax breaks are given through a program called the Jobs Pilot. And so, Brandon, would you tell us about the Jobs Pilot?
Absolutely. Thank you, Rob. So for some people out here, this may be a review, but for others, the Jobs Pilot, what is that? And more importantly, how does that relate to us and our money and our public funds? So a pilot stands for Payment in Lieu of Taxes. It's basically an agreement between the city and a company that provides the company with a tax break for getting here. So it's an incentivization deal to get businesses to develop here. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. They create, because we want development here, we want jobs here. But before we, start handing out jobs pilots, willy-nilly, we want to ask a few questions. Do they create real benefit for our communities? Is that company developing here worth whatever loss of property tax revenue we have through the pilot? And would the company locate here anyway, which would render the Jobs Pilot redundant and unnecessary? So I just want to talk a little bit about the current process for that and lay it out in a little comic. So here's the process. So first, the city hires the Chamber of Commerce to recruit businesses to Chattanooga. From there, businesses will complete a Jobs Pilot application, and then the Chamber of Commerce reviews that application. So what about the public? Well, unfortunately, there are no publicly adopted criteria for jobs pilots and how those get put forward. And so there are no required public hearings and no staff report at this point. So very little public involvement. Next, the city's Industrial Development Board, also known as the IDB, conducts a final review of the pilot application. The IDB takes ownership of the land, equipment, buildings of the company, and then the company leases the assets from the IDB for a small amount, usually about $1. And so the big question we're asking here tonight, are these agreements benefiting our communities? So here's a map right here of some of those. So I'm going to hand it off.
Yeah, Helen, would you tell us about this map we're looking at?
Be happy to. You've heard the expression, a picture is worth 1,000 words. I don't know, how much this map is worth, at least 1 million, I think, or something like that. Basically, we won't go into the detail on it, but what it shows, anything you see in a color is tax advantage, which is to say it doesn't pay property taxes the way you and I do. So in it, we're showing pilots, we're showing tax increment financing, and we're also showing government-owned properties, which are tax exempt. And I think what this map tells us is that we've got a lot of properties in the city of Chattanooga that are colored. And so they're not saying they're not paying their fair share. There's some good reasons why some of them are not. But you can see when you take those properties out of the mix that the burden falls to the rest of us, to small businesses, to homeowners and all like that. So also given the fact that, as we said earlier, that this represents about $25 million just in tax incentives, we need to be really careful before we add more color to this map. As we've said earlier, we're not against all tax incentives, but we believe we need to be strategic. We need to make sure that any incentive, and we're talking specifically here about jobs pilots, that there is significant public benefit in terms of the number of jobs, the investment, but also the wages of these jobs. And also we need to make sure that the but-for test is met. The but-for test means without the incentive, we wouldn't be here. We feel like that some of the pilots that we've given in the past, the company likely would have located regardless. It was more the sort of the icing on the cake, and the cake was already baked. So we need to be really careful. We need to be strategic, we believe, in the future. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Jeff, and he's going to talk about barriers to accountability and transparency.
Thank you, Helen. Yes, so the first major barrier, as Brandon sort of alluded to, is that the process for actually arranging these pilots is extremely opaque, and it takes place between the mayor, the chamber, and the business in question, with very little opportunity, even for city council people, to become educated about the project that they're about to give away many years of future taxes for. So we're asking for a transparent process and a plan with a concrete cost-benefit analysis and a public forum where citizen and council input can have a little bit more time to mature and be brought forward. The second major barrier is that currently, because of the very short window for actually educating ourselves about it, there's pretty much a rubber stamp that gets put on all of these pilots once they've come out of the chamber. Even the IDB board rarely has any dissenting votes or even any questions about these pilots. And that, for both the IDB and the city council, that can be chalked up to the immense amount of political pressure that there is to get these things done once they're already presented on a silver platter by the mayor and chamber. So we need a culture of skepticism and robust debate about these tax breaks, and we need to make sure that our politicians and our citizens have the have political cover to actually contest whether these are in the best interest of the community. The third major problem is this narrow vision for economic development in Chattanooga. We don't have long-term plans, which makes it impossible to fit these pilots into a comprehensive plan, not just for how we're going to get slightly better than where we're at, but how we're going to get to where we really want to be, where our citizens deserve to be, and the picture of the community that includes all of us in a sort of equitable share.
And so that's where what brings us to tonight. You've heard enough from Caleb at this point. We're very excited to be able to pose some of these questions to Tim Kelly, candidate for mayor. At last, in the chat, there is a link to the Caleb website for this campaign. If you're interested in joining this work, please get in touch with us. And do remember, early voting begins February 10th for the municipal election on March 2nd. So thank you for joining us, Tim Kelly. Our first question that will be asked by Lanisha, we heard from a moment ago, but first we want to invite you, if you'd like to introduce yourself, tell us about what brings you to put yourself forward for mayor of Chattanooga.
Well, thank you, Rob. Appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I'll do just that. My name's Tim Kelly. I grew up here in Chattanooga. Went away to New York for 4 years to college and came back right away in 1989. So I've been here for the last 32 years. My family business was the car business. I grew up in the car business, later branched out into the motorcycle business and started some other businesses, including Chattanooga Football Club and a couple of digital startups. And I've kind of turned into a bit of a serial entrepreneur. But at the time, when I got back here, I also started working in the nonprofit world. I grew up in a family where servant leadership was just kind of expected. And so I began volunteering in 1990 and had been volunteering in some capacity in Chattanooga ever since. Most recently I was the chairman of the Community Foundation until recently, where I learned a lot about impact investing, which I hope we'll talk about later. I was a trustee at Benwood, where Caleb came and spoke to us, and was very impressed with the work you guys have done. So all that nonprofit work, led me to the realization that philanthropy can only do so much. And too often it just puts Band-Aids on problems, and ironically sometimes perpetuates broken systems in doing so. And look, we need structural change. We need it in this country, and we need it in Chattanooga. And I understand it well, and I have a heart for the work, and I don't have any future political ambitions. So I think I have political courage that others may lack, because I'm not beholden to a party. And I don't have a future career. I don't want to go to Nashville. I don't want to go to DC. I'm a localist at heart. I truly love Chattanooga. I think this place has the potential to really be the greatest city in America, but there's a lot of this stuff that's got to be fixed. And as an entrepreneur, I'm a guy that likes to fix broken things, and I hate wasted potential. So I'm excited about the opportunity to get to do some of this work with you guys and fix some things.
We have a follow-up on exactly that point. Lanisha, would you take it?
Yes, sir. All right. Thank you, Mr. Kelly, again for joining us tonight.
Yes, ma'am.
The next questions we would hopefully take around 10 minutes.
Okay.
So my first question is, as we researched and talked to a variety of stakeholders about our current processes for granting tax incentives, we were surprised by the lack of information provided to both the public and key decision makers.
Mm-hmm.
Were these specific items in our Develop With Us campaign presentation that you were, I'm sorry, let me try that again. Were there specific items in our Develop With Us presentation that you were surprised to learn? Which, if any, parts of the tax incentive process would you hope to change?
Well, the presentation was fantastic. I really enjoyed it, and there weren't really any surprises, but one thing stuck out to me, which was the quote that I think it was Robert Austin that said, "We want Chattanooga to flourish on its own terms." And I'm a localist. I mean, it's exactly that. I think we need to be much, much more intentional about the retention and recycling of capital and local capital. And we'll get into community benefits agreements and all that later. But again, transparency is baked into the way I've always done business. I mean, I've still got a Honda motorcycle store, and it's biggest one in the country. And the reason it is because it's a one price store and we have no fees and taxes. It's not an ad for the store, but I do believe that that's just the way things work. The truth will set you free. And I really believe that. So I'm not a person to hide the football or smoke and mirrors. It's just not how I am. And clearly we've had a terrible time here with that. We haven't had clawbacks. We needed them. We haven't enforced clawbacks. We haven't had anything to, giving pilots without provisions to use local labor or local vendors or local contractors just makes no sense at all to me. Look, I think we need a community benefit agreement policy. And I think, Nashville's policy is a good one that's worth looking at. We've studied that one. Again, Chattanooga has a long history of sort of studying and doing things together. So I look forward to crafting something that looks like that. I will also say, probably getting ahead of another question here, but my administration would restore a legislative policy analyst to the city council, an independent analyst who could look at bills and legislation and provide input and clarity to them, and in so doing, provide it to the public, so that everybody can see it, right? And I would actually show up to city council meetings for the benefit of public debate. I think that's a critically important part of public dialogue that's been missing for Chattanooga for quite some time.
Thank you. And I would jump back in here for just a moment. Something that I forgot to say to encourage everybody on the call. We will have a time of opening up for questions. Please put them into the chat and we will make sure that they get addressed. For our second question that we have, Janice, would you please?
Yes, thank you, Rob. Mr. Kelly, as you prepare to be elected mayor, how do you plan to work towards accountability and transparency in procurement and the granting of tax incentives? Could you give us some concrete examples?
Well, I'll get as concrete as I can, but I think one of the things we desperately need is a formula, a public formula. I don't think we can get it right. I'm kind of a spreadsheet nerd, but in theory, we should be able to look at the net present value of in future incentives and compare that to the benefit. Again, Nashville's framework springs to mind that an employer says they're going to provide, both in terms of the average wage of jobs, the amount of local labor that's going to be used, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we need a framework, a public, transparent framework. And we may not always agree. Helen and I had this conversation, right? I mean, there's no such thing as an exact science, but I think we've kind of been sold a bill of goods a lot of times, very frankly. I think that may be because you didn't have someone with business experience at the table. I went back to business school late in life. I was 42 years old when I went back and got my MBA down at Emory because I was intimidated by finance. And when I left there, I realized that old saying that, if you can't explain it to your grandmother, you really don't understand it. It's absolutely true. There's nothing about finance that the public can't understand if it's properly presented. The problem is a lot of times people don't want to properly present it. They want you to believe that you can't understand it. Well, you can. Anybody can. Right? It's all a question of the way in which it's framed. So again, I would seek to create a framework, a public framework that we could use to evaluate pilots and TIFs. Again, are we going to make everybody happy every time? No. Again, the but-for rule really is the bottom line here. The idea is to attract investment. We have to have economic incentives. But the question is, are we getting rooked? The old saying goes, if you can't spot the sucker at the poker table, you're generally the sucker. And I think we've been the sucker for too long. As Chattanooga grows economically, we don't have to do that sort of thing anymore. I know business. I understand business. I'm not going to get twisted around the pole by a bunch of people coming in here and trying to rip us off. I'm a car dealer, I know that game. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Helen, imagine you have can continue on exactly that point.
Yes, this will be related, Tim. So I've got sort of a general question and then a specific follow-up question. General question is, who will you rely on for economic information, planning, and advice?
Well, I mean, look, I'm an economist at heart. I could bore you to tears with with the charts and graphs. I went up to the Young American Leaders Program at Harvard and got introduced to their cluster mapping data, and I look at that on every time there's an update. So I'm a voracious reader. I'm a subscriber to The Economist. I take information wherever I can get it. I'm a big fan of one of the reasons I'm running is I read a book called The New Geography of Jobs that scared the hell out of me, honestly. The thesis essentially is that, the nature of work is changing, as was said in the introduction, and the higher wage jobs have been going to other cities around us. And if we're not real careful, we become a wasteland of $10 hour service jobs in Gatlinburg down by the river. And that is no fate for Chattanooga, right? So we have to take very intentional steps to keep that from happening. And that's kind of a little bit off topic for your question, but the long and short of it is, I'm a reader. I'm a voracious consumer of information, and so I'm open to any and all counsel. I'm not just going to take a piece of paper that the chamber hands me at face value.
Okay, let me give you a specific example. I would predict that in the next 4 years of the next mayor's term, that there will be major requests for tax increment financing, pilots, public funding of a baseball stadium, et cetera, et cetera. And some of our most valuable currently and potentially valuable property will be subject to that. The US Pipe Wheeling site, the Alston site, and then the reworking of where the current baseball stadium is. So how do you think you might go about in a scenario like this, if you need to deal with these challenges and opportunities? How would you go about making sure the right questions are asked and that the public interest is protected?
Well,
deciding where you stand on whether or not we should be granting incentives.
Well, it starts again with an open, public, transparent dialogue. I think we've been missing my general culture. I mean, we currently have a city hall where department heads can't talk to council people without going through a filter and seeing if it's okay. And we got to get back to the living room culture of public dialogue and again a spirit of transparency and conversation about what's best for our common interest and our common purpose. So look, I think having more lively, vibrant city council meetings where there's open dialogue about these things is great. I'm open to any sort of form of input or dialogue. You're right about the Wheeling site. Again, this would make a great, we could spend the rest of the night talking about it because it's been sitting there vacant for the longest time and something should happen. It's been an eyesore there I kind of like ruin porn myself, but it's something needs to happen and the owners need to do something with it but it has to serve the public benefit. So I'm sure that probably will happen in the next 4 years. That the kicker is going to be, is the mayor going to be somebody who can be captured by those forces and run over because they have no experience or really don't know what they're looking at? Or is it someone who does know what they're looking at, who doesn't frankly, need the influence or the money or the power that's being offered by the powerful, and can make sure that it does happen in the right way for the public benefit?
Thank you.
Thank you. For this last question, we're going to ask to keep the response to around 2 minutes. It's going to shift gears a little bit. So, Joseph.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Mr. Kelly, for being here. My question maybe follows up a little bit with what you were saying before, but we see that we're living in a very competitive global marketplace at this time. We look and we know that things happening in China affect us here directly. And in places like China, they're making very strong and high high-powered investments in all their infrastructure, in their communication systems, in a number of things. So when we're thinking about our future here and our security of our people, do you believe that Chattanooga is making the scope of investments it needs in the public and in these public services so that Chattanoogans are prepared to compete in that environment? Maybe you could speak to that a bit.
Yeah, no, sadly, I don't believe that, Joseph. I'm sorry to say. I mean, I was very involved with the Chattanooga 2.0 movement from the beginning because I still believe that education, broadly speaking, is really the single most important strategic topic that faces us. And it's moral, it's cultural, it's economic. I mean, we brought employers here who then privately have gone back to the chamber and said, you sold me a bill of goods because we can't find people to fill these jobs. And so and again, particularly relative to Asian economies, I read a book a couple of months ago that was kind of hustled out quickly about the COVID crisis. Really the single most important strategic bounce back. Can't remember the name of the book off the top of my head. I'll come back to it. But the long and short of it was the Asian economies, it's called a wake up call. That's the name of the book. The Asian economies have been and are accelerating out of the COVID crisis at an ever faster rate. Part of it, very frankly, is that they invest more heavily in the public sector and they attract higher paid workers to the public sector, which is one of the reasons I support a $15 an hour wage at the city. I mean, it's not just about equity wage fairness, it's about getting, better people. But I think it really begins and ends with education. We have to write a new chapter in our city's history. This is the way to do it. I mean, we really have to kind of reframe the whole thing around what's best for Chattanooga because, Chattanooga's always functioned a little bit like a city state. The cavalry is not coming. It's up to us if we're going to do it. Nashville's not our friend. Atlanta's not our friend. We're in a competition with a lot of these other cities. There are some brilliant people in Chattanooga that could be living anywhere in the world, but they choose to live here because of that spirit of community and the promise of the community. So we have an opportunity to do it and do it correctly. But again, the city, I think, has lacked an orchestra conductor. I mean, that's part of the job of a mayor, is to convene people and lead the conversation. We haven't had that. Again, I'm not running against Mayor Burke, but I don't, because I think that's a function of not having future political ambition. I'm likely to be less cautious, and I'm willing to look at things through a long-term lens because I don't care if they pay off during my term or my lifetime, for that matter. I'm interested in what's best, for Chattanooga in the long term.
All right, well, great. Well, thank you very much. I guess one thing that maybe I would briefly follow up on is speak a little bit as a businessman. There's kind of a cultural mindset that we have about making public investment in government's capability and competence to do it. So those may be some things that have maybe held us back a little bit because our budgets really for the city level are very tight, really, for the magnitude and scope of what we need to look to do.
Well, you're right. And look, I think we've got a narrative in the United States that's been pretty unhelpful. And very frankly, until I was probably 40, I would have told you that I was kind of a free market guy, just let the markets function. And after the Great Recession, I read a book, it's like book club night, but I read a book called Why Markets Fail by a guy named John Cassidy, who's at the New Yorker, oddly enough, but he's a brilliant economist. And he made, really an excellent point that there, look, if markets really function perfectly all the time, we wouldn't have antitrust law, for one thing. There are a lot of things that wouldn't. A government has to step in to make markets function for the public good. That the idea somehow that it's oppositional, that it's all government or all private is just silly. And I think once you see that and see that they can work together for the common benefit, life gets a lot easier. So look, government absolutely has a role to play. At the same time, if government's too high-handed and it's dismissive of private investment or is naive about the way that, the old invisible hand works. I mean, private investment, you can't blame a compass for pointing north. Investors are going to try to get the most return they can, all things being equal. But if they find a market attractive, they're going to come in to the market anyway. Think about the Publix project down on Broad Street. You know, Jim Johnson stood up and made it a little more difficult. But look, they're coming. They were fine with it at the end of the day. It's that constructive that process of constructive conflict is how we arrive at the right answer. So it's business and government working together to get it right.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And thank you again, everybody, for joining us for this conversation this evening. We're going to respect everybody's time this evening, but still have a few minutes for open Q&A. So I hope, Mr. Kelly, if we'll consider this a rapid fire.
Yeah.
And if anybody listening has questions, please put them into the chat and we will get them answered in the next 5 to 6 minutes. But first of all, there's one question that really stands out so far, and that is about, or it seems to speak to, the lack of trust in the economic development strategy as it's been seen over the last couple of years. Specifically, they want to know exactly what is your understanding of a community benefits agreement. And you mentioned it earlier. What would be your support for community benefits agreements in your administration?
I'll get as specific as I can. I mean, again, I think we can look at the value, whether you want to look at it as the lifetime value, the net present value of a particular incentive, pilot or TIF or whatever's at stake, and then put that on the table, put it on the scale relative to all the other benefits. What's the average wage, that they're going to pay? How much local labor are they going to use in the process? Very frankly, that's the one that kind of blows my mind, that I just don't see any reason on earth, because you never know if a business is going to succeed or fail, right? They're going to tell you whatever they want to tell you. And I mean, look, pro formas are pro formas. You do 3 year or 5 year, nobody knows what the market's going to do. But why we won't use or mandate at least a percentage of local labor, local vendors, it just blows my mind. To give away public money to have a contractor drive in here from Charlotte, is just insane to me. So, I mean, that's, to me, the core of a community benefit agreement is a clear-headed analysis of the financial impact of what the companies bring to the table versus what we're offering as an incentive. And again, I do like the Nashville model. You can Google that and take a look at it. It's pretty good. And I think we can probably even do a little better and get a little more creative with it, but it's a good start.
But again, what would be the role that they might play in your own administration's approach to economic development?
I would require a community benefit agreement of some type if we're going to give pilots and TIFs. Is that what that's.
Thank you.
This is not academic. I mean, that would be the deal.
Another question cites that one of your opponents in this race said that in order to pay public sector wages at a wage that is high enough to recruit new workers and retain current ones, it's necessary to take away the pension plan and replace it with more 401k style benefits for city employees. What's your position on the public pension plan?
No, I don't think it's necessary to do that. Again, pensions are complicated animals that have to do with money in and money out and rates of return and projections. Again, it's really just a math problem. Excel has changed the world, and analysis is a lot easier than it used to be. Defined, certainly not for police and fire, who don't even get Social Security. It's just out of the question. So I do not think that would be necessary now.
What would be your position on establishing neighborhood community development corporations? Or what community development tools do you think are missing from our toolbox for local economic development?
Well, again, as I said, I'm a localist. This really is turned into like book club night, but this book right here had a huge impact on me, and I recommend it to everybody on this call. You asked me what was surprising to me about the video. I'm surprised y'all don't talk more about localism generally. Bali came to town a few years back and did a conference, and they call themselves something else now. I think it's commonfuture.co. But localism is, look, it's the antidote to divisive populism, because when you're looking at your friends and your neighbors and your coworkers in the eye, all the ideology falls away, and you can get things done locally, where what goes on at not that the state and the federal level doesn't matter, but it's really where our focus belongs. It's where you get the most return for your work. What was the question? Gosh, I think I lost the thread. I got so carried away talking.
If it's a rapid fire round, we only have a few more minutes here. On exactly that point, though, another question has come in. Do you have any?
Go ahead.
Do you have any ideas in particular on how to control for the influence of out of town, out of state investors trying to take advantage of the rising housing market here, depleting local resources or limiting supply?
Yes. All right. So I'll back up real quick on the other one, that neighborhood development. One of our plans for neighborhood development would be to give more autonomy to neighborhoods. I'm also a big fan of neighborhood trusts, which is a way that neighborhoods can control their own neighborhood development. They can get grants from foundations and then buy up property, hold it, and then, steer it to control the development and the future of their own neighborhoods. I'm a huge fan of that. Again, we add it to the stack of things that other more progressive cities are doing elsewhere that, again, we've fallen behind. There was a time when Chattanooga kind of led the way on a lot of these things, and we've fallen off the mark. It's been, 10 or 12 years since, people were coming here to learn all the cool stuff we were doing. So that's another one of those. As far as out-of-town investors go, we can get in the weeds here, and I don't want to freak anybody out, but most of our downtown and south side is a federal opportunity zone, which is a massive tax break for carried over capital gains that in one way is good in that it's attracting investment. It's not costing us anything locally. But if you combine that with the fact that a lot of these things are being built to flip to real estate investment trusts, it's a game of musical chairs that will end very badly and could create a massive bubble here. And the city has got to get involved and slow down this train and look, because it's not creating affordable housing. It's going to create a real issue, and it's going to put that much more need for us to really execute well on our affordable housing plan. And we can do a lot around an affordable housing plan with impact investing. We can attract investment, not only public investment, the city can co-invest. These are asset-backed investments, which are very, very safe historically. We can co-invest with foundations and with private money to create affordable housing. And we've got to grow the supply of affordable housing yesterday. I mean, we're already behind the 8 ball with all these folks coming in from out of town, driving up housing prices.
And then as a last question, I would like to throw in something that perhaps we haven't addressed directly enough so far tonight, but if we talk about the inequality of this period of growth on top of historical disparities that have existed in Chattanooga, do you have any particular plans to make racial equity part of how your administration would approach economic development?
Yes. Look, I mean, again, book club night. I just recently finished The Color of Law. I thought I understood, just when you think you knew it all, and so I did a lot of this work at the Community Foundation as a chairman. I made Racial Equity Institute groundwater training. We made it our board orientation. So if you came to be on the board at CGFC, you took it because it was that central to the work we're doing. There is just no way we can get around the fact that from 1619 to 1965, we had laws and policies in place that literally were designed to enshrine white supremacy in this country. There's no way around it, right? And the echoes and the shadows of that reverberate to this day. So we can't just pretend as though it didn't happen and again, let the market function normally and go back. We have to be intentional about equity. Again, I think it starts with educational equity. And I think if you look at our strategies, which are extensive online. Again, there's been news in the story about me self-funding the campaign. Candidates can spend one of two ways out there on the campaign trail: beholding themselves to special interests or working on policy and listening to voters. And we've done a lot of great policy on the website at kellyforcha.com. And I think you'll find, if you look at it, equity is at the heart of every one of our strategies.
Thank you. And so at the risk of making you repeat yourself,
Yep.
this time we are looking for one-word answers. And these are the 4 questions that, again, we as Caleb's Economic Mobility Task Force are bringing to all of the candidates. First, we ask, will you commit to develop and implement clear, enforceable, publicly accessible criteria for jobs pilots?
Absolutely.
Will you help ensure that City Council, relevant boards, and the general public have thorough written information outlining exactly how a proposed tax break will benefit the public?
Absolutely.
Will you ensure that this information is provided well ahead of any vote on a pilot, TIF, or other form of public incentive?
Yes.
Will you support an effort to require relevant boards or City Council to hold public hearings for respective public pilot proposals?
Yes, absolutely.
And would you work with Caleb to help identify and set clear expectations for appointees to the IDB and HEB bond boards?
I would be honored. Yes.
Thank you. And so want to say once again, thank you to everybody who has joined us tonight to help have more of this conversation. Certainly hear where Mr. Kelly is coming from, what he's bringing to this race. I'm going to put again into the chat, if you want to be involved with our work as Caleb, please visit that link for the Develop With Us campaign. Remember that early voting starts on February 10th. Election day is March 2nd. And Mr. Kelly, if you'd like, we would be pleased to give you the last word just to tell to close us out for the evening.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity. I just want to say how impressed I am with Caleb. When I was on the Benwood board, you know, this came up, and very frankly, again, not telling, I don't think anything out of turn here, but there was some controversy about, you know, political bent and so on, and I stood up for Caleb then, and I will always stand up for Caleb, because you guys do a fantastic job of framing the problems in a incredibly practical, local way, and really a non-ideological way. And that's exactly the lens that I look at the world through. So I'm thankful and grateful that you're here, and I look forward to supporting you in the future. I would just say, since this campaign began, you know, again, we've spent a lot of time looking at policy and convening working groups to looking at just about every conceivable aspect of civic architecture and culture. And, you know, we're happy that we've been able to frame the conversation. I would just say, you'll hear a lot of the same things from my opponents, because they've been reading up on our website, and we're pleased with that, right? Or we're flattered by it, because we've been able, I think, to correctly frame the conversation for the future of Chattanooga. The question, however, is really who can do the things, because I learned a long time ago, strategy, you know, without execution is just wallpaper. It's, you know, they're just plans, right? Urban planning is full of them. And I learned a long time ago, you know, in business, that what I bring to the table as a small business owner has really little to do with an understanding of business. It has to do with organizational management. And the city is an organization it's the 9th largest employer in the region with almost 2,600 employees. And so I think it's fair to say that I'm the only candidate in the race with extensive expertise in history and crisis management and organizational management. So it's not so much what candidates are saying, that's important. Don't get me wrong, but as important is who can do them and who will do them. And again, I have no future political ambition. I just want to fix Chattanooga, honest to goodness.
Thank you, sir. And thank you again to everybody for joining us this evening. Stay tuned for more of these conversations. Everybody stay safe.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you.